Hello YouTube. I'm starting this video at Lisamore, the Italian festival, and beautiful display of culture on show here at Lisamore, including about 16 Ferraris, all brought down by the Queensland Ferrari Club. Very impressive. Actually, if you're into macadamia farming in the Northern Rivers, you've probably seen Ferrari tractors. And there's a misconception that Ferrari started off as a tractor company. Lamborghini did start off as a tractor company, and then they branched into sports cars. Ferrari, on the other hand, started off as sports cars and then branched into tractors in 1957. And you'll still find some Ferrari tractors around the Northern Rivers. And I think that's pretty much the most Ferraris that people have seen here, other than tractors, for a very long time. Anyway, on with our show. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, I know I said I wasn't going to harvest block 1, but and I was going to invite my relatives to come along and do harvesting under the trees for me. But when your relatives come from Sydney, they tend to want to come up and get on your machines and do it. So rather than crawling around under trees, there's my brother. He's coming along with my nifty Nabba harvester and picking up some nuts in that. And so far there's been a remarkably good crop in block 1, a lot larger than we thought, and I suspect there's going to be a couple of very full cars going back to Sydney at the end of this journey. But anyway, it's a nice problem to have, and I do hope the relatives enjoy them, those of you who are watching.
Dehusker 1 and 2 switched on. These are the switches to start those dehuskers. Our blower must be on. So we're going to turn on our waste removal, Husker 1 and 2. That's all we're going to turn on.
Yep.
And the trommel, to start the trommel spinning over there. So first we're going to turn on our blower. Turn on Dehusker 1 and 2.
In industry news, just at the end of June 2023, the Australian Macadamia Society's come out with a news bulletin in which, surprise, surprise, they've announced that the forecast macadamia crop for the Australian growing industry is now going to be down 11% on their previous predictions. And look, the reason I'm not surprised by it is it seemed that the harvest was predicted to just be, in line with the increasing growth of macadamia orchards, and no one turned their mind to whether or not farmers were inclined to pick up the crop for the prices they were being offered. And it turns out many of them haven't. And so the crop forecasts, which are actually made with the assistance of the Australian Macadamia Handlers Association, which is really the nut processors, they've realised that there's a lot fewer nuts coming through the door from Australian suppliers, and so in reality, while there are more macadamia nuts in Australia, there is going to be a reduced crop because of harvests not being turned in, or certainly not being sold to processors. And where does the nut go? Well, some of it's going to be mulched up, some of it will be put to other uses, and hopefully there'll be a show soon from me showing you what other things people can do with macadamia nuts, but I won't give you any more spoilers than that. The bulletin also contained some interesting news that from the crop that is going into the processors, both the kernel size and the kernel recovery are down relative to previous years. And it does get me thinking as to why that might be. Now, the 2022 season was very rain affected. There were a lot of nuts that, you know, with a fairly low reject percentage, it must be said. But they were a good size. There was good kernel recovery and an overall pretty good crop coming in 2022. And, you know, prices were already dropping by then, but people had clearly invested in the crop. And, you know, it just struck me that as a growing season, 2022 can't have been that good because there were so many cloudy days, you know, and the macadamias need a lot of sun to put oil in these nuts. That's what they use for the energy. And the result was really very good. Now, this year, we've had rain, particularly during the nut sizing period, which is when you get the, you know, the high kernel recovery, the high kernel size. We've had rain when we were supposed to get it. In fact, we had too much rain, and those who had rain in flowering had a big problem because we just didn't get the nuts set at all. So what is causing this season's nuts to be of a poorer size and kernel recovery than previous seasons? Look, a couple of theories. One is we've had a fairly dry summer with below average rainfall for that part of the growing season. I'm not sure I put too much stock in that, because the common wisdom is that when you you know, get to about December, which was when it started going dry, the nuts don't size up anymore. That they really finish growing, the shell hardens, and whatever kernel size and kernel recovery you're going to get is pretty much fixed at that point. So that might not be it. The other theory, and one I tend to believe more, is that macadamia farmers, sensing the price news, particularly towards the end of 2022 when the processors were reducing the notional prices, there'd be plenty of farmers who possibly put a halt in investment or were much more cautious about what they spent producing nuts in the coming year. And as a result, the harvest that's coming in autumn 2023 is, you know, reducing in quality, not so much to meet the market because the processors are still getting more than what they're paying for, but at least to sort of minimise the farmers' losses. And there is, you know, I think something in that. Why the Australian Macadamia Handlers Association set a high forecast and thought that farmers would just turn their nuts in regardless of the price they were being paid for them, I don't know. They've obviously had a bit of a reality check now. Whether that affects the prices or not remains to be seen. But you know, this year, for most farmers, you know, it's a matter of loss making and or really working out what is best to cut your losses, and that may mean no harvesting altogether and just, you know, ploughing the nuts back into the soil, turning them into nutrient for your trees, and hoping that something better emerges next year. What are the lessons to draw from this? Well, the lessons for farmers are pretty obvious. If you don't spend money, you don't make money, or in this case, you don't lose money. But if you want high kernel recovery, if you want, you know, large kernel size, fertilizer is needed to you know, generate those things for you. And you know, without the fertilizer, the nut crop can change really quite quickly within the space of a single season. So that's one thing. What should the nut processors learn from this? Well, not to put too fine a point on it, you know, the farmers aren't just going to take stupid prices from you and deliver you a profit while they're widening their own losses. There has to be a little bit of give and take. And, you know, if people aren't buying macadamias from the processors, then just don't buy them from the farmers rather than give us a price that is unsustainable. I've just paused at this tree here to show you, sort of as a progression from my last video, the little baby flower heads that are coming around on the trees. This particular tree is a very, very happy boy for some reason, and it's probably going to put on a load of flowers this particular year. So yeah, nut processors do need to sort of factor in that, you know, when you drop the price to this sort of level, you're just not going to get the floods of nuts you were getting when the prices were reasonable and profitable for growers. And it may mean that when you're thinking about offering a price to your farmers next year, you might have to factor in that, you know, farmers need to be reimbursed properly for giving you their produce, because they know you're making a profit at some level, and it's not just a matter of dish out a price and expect the crop to come in. What does it mean more globally? Does it also mean that because Australian farmers are getting a bad price, the crop in the rest of the world will go down? Well, we haven't got that news yet. That news will trickle through probably over the course of the next year to see what, you know, in particular South Africa, who's now the biggest producer, to see whether their crop goes down, and, you know, longer run, what happens. In terms of what people are using their land for, there's some more stats introduced by the Australian Macadamia Society in the last week, and you know, they've looked at a map of macadamia farms in Australia, and while the total hectareage, if that's the word, of macadamia farms has increased by about 1,000 odd hectares in the years 2020 to 2022, there was some disappointing news in that in the Ballina local government area, there are now some 230 odd fewer hectares being used for macadamias. Not sure what they've been changed to, but, you know, there are people turning away from macadamia farming. And in Lismore, there's some 250 fewer hectares devoted towards macadamias. Now, that's out of a total of about 5,000 hectares each in those two local government areas. It's not insignificant, but it's not huge either. I don't know particularly where those farms are going, because there's still sort of areas of macadamias near Ballina in particular that look like they're being either planted with macadamias or they're raising very young ones. So what's being deleted and what's being taken out needs to be sort of zeroed in a little bit. But it's being mapped, and there are online resources available to members of the Australian Macadamia Society where you can actually look at a map of Australia and see where all the macadamia farming is done. And it's kind of fun to mouse around in your own spare time. Well, guys, that's it. That's just a fairly brief update for now. It's the end of financial year, and of course, like macadamia farmers, I'm sure you're hoping for a better financial year next time. Catch you again very soon. Bye for now.